So then you are Burl Horniachek, and we're going to talk briefly, but I hope with penetrating insight about this recent anthology of Christian verse that you issued. Could you say something about yourself before anything else?
Well, I'm a Canadian, and I
Wait,
live.
that's all right. That's all right. No need to apologize. Actually, it goes quite the other way these days. No American with a conscience or an intellect is not ashamed uh, uh, to talk to a Canadian. We feel we should apologize for everything. So, but anyway, yes,
Oh,
go.
yes. So I'm a Canadian. I grew up in Western Canada in a province called Alberta, near to a city called Edmonton. It was in kind of a smaller um, sort of Bible college town, and I eventually made my way out to the University of Toronto, where I got a degree in ancient Near Eastern studies, focusing on Hebrew and ancient Israel. Um, I bounced around with various types of careers, and including some, probably the most one would be high school teaching. And then I made my way back to Alberta at one point, and I took some creative writing classes from Nobel Prize winner Derek Walcott when he was at the University of Alberta. And uh, that was also around the time that I met my wife, who is from Winnipeg, a different, larger city in Western Canada. And she is a general surgeon, and we work very close, or she works quite close to the city of Winnipeg in a hospital there. And I mainly take care of our two kids, although they're starting to make their way into school, and so I have less to do with them, or will have less to do with them in the next couple few years here. And so that's kind of the basic story of my life.
I should tell you though that we're not so provincial in the States that Edmonton and Winnipeg are exotic and unknown lands. I mean,
Well,
we know where Alberta. Well, I know where Alberta is. Come to think of it, actually,
it's
I wouldn't lay any money on that these days.
I think it depends. Yeah, you don't really know what exactly your audience is when you're talking to people in the U.S. Some people are very informed, and some people are not. And I would assume you are, but I don't know about everyone in your audience. So.
Oh, they're far and away the sharpest tools in the shed. I mean, I attract only the best and the brightest. Um, I mean, the occasion for this conversation is that it seemed out of the blue. I had received this book, To Heaven's Rim, the Kingdom Poet's Book of World Christian Poetry from its beginnings to 1800 in English translation. Let's get that
Yeah,
full subtitle.
got a mouthful.
Uh,
Yeah.
before I got word from you that it had been sent to me by your good graces, and it really it's from Cascade Books. I enjoyed it immensely, and I'll tell you what I principally liked about it after I, uh, furrowed my brow at the seemingly interminable subtitle, was that it is specifically meant to be an anthology that doesn't tread the well-worn paths that these things usually do in English. I mean, if you pick up a collection of Christian verse, say, a Penguin collection or any other collection, you know what you'll get. Some of the authors will come from outside the Anglosphere, but usually from nowhere farther flung than Western Europe. You'll get some
Yeah.
Eastern, maybe a verse or two of a Russian poet, and maybe, of course, some of the patristic, some of the Greek and Latin, and even
Hmm.
a dash of Syrian poetry, but mostly it's in English. We get a healthy dose of the metaphysicals, a lot of Herbert and Vaughan, Crashaw,
Yeah.
Donne, and so forth. And then we know who the usual suspect. It'll go past 1800. We know the 19th century, and of course the 20th century poets. Which
Hmm.
in English, the 20th century was a notable age for revival of Christian verse among great poets, and in a sense, it's rather like the metaphysical age, in which it wasn't just poetry that was happenstantially Christian,
Hmm.
but that was actually on Christian themes,
Hmm.
explored with a certain depth and kind of a theological sophistication. This is very different. You've cut short at 1800, which is convenient, actually, as it turns out, because right away it means you can't avail yourself of the common uh, trove
Hmm.
of what's usually the last 30 or 40% of a collection like this. But it's all in translation. Why did you want to do that? Um,
Well, as you say, a lot of the poets that either other Christian poets or that just Christians in general have been reading have just been the writers in English with a very narrow smattering of other things. And so I wanted to, why redo what someone else has already done fairly well. I may have, you know, a few questions about, quibbles about selections and other anthologies, but why do what someone else has already done? And um, there's a few the usual suspects, as you say, even in these other languages. So you'd think of, Dante, Saint John of the Cross, maybe Petrarch, and then a few 20th century figures might make it in as well.
Petrarch is not necessarily likely to make his way in. In my experience, even that's
Yeah,
considered a bit recherche.
yeah, he is not the Christian aspect of his work is not usually highlighted,
Right.
but is at least someone that people in English will have heard of, and then perhaps if the anthologist is a little bit adventurous, they might include something from him.
It's good for me. I see things like Guillaume du Bartas, say.
Hmm.
Obviously, in his day, a towering figure in French
Hmm.
letters. His hexameral epics, for instance, were you know
Yeah.
as significant in the francophone world as Milton was among English
Hmm.
readers. But also, I mean, you've got, and I was very happy to see this. I have to say, you include figures like Wu Li,
Hmm. Yeah.
and in my experience, that's completely unprecedented.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to say anything about Wu Li? Actually, he actually was a very, a fascinating figure in many ways,
Hmm.
but also uh, I would say, genuinely a great exponent and developer of the classical Chinese.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, actually, I shouldn't be talking. I just asked you to say something about Wu Li, and
That was actually someone that I was going to bring up in light of your own recent translation of the Tao Te Ching, and what you see in. So maybe I'll go right to the beginning, to the basics there with Wu Li. He was a Chinese, um, mainly known in China for being a painter or a visual artist, and is very famous in China for that. However, he was also a poet and also a Catholic priest, a Jesuit priest. And so this was in the 1600s.
yeah, it was like
And
1632 he was born.
yeah,
Yeah, I think
yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
something around there. Yeah.
yeah.
And what you'll find in his poetry is that he he really takes a lot of the traditional um, uh, imagery and symbols from Chinese culture and brings them together with Christianity. And I don't think it's done in a particularly just as a sort of syncretism. I think he really gives it quite a bit of thought for how to incorporate those symbols and images from his own culture into the Christian worldview as well. And he talks about the way, and which is also an old word for how Christians often referred to their faith as well. And I was kind of curious, just having translated the Tao Te Ching, what parallels did you see there?
Well, obviously, Wuli's from a far later period that's gone through the whole development of the Chinese poetic canon and the high point of the Tang
Mm-hmm.
dynasty and all that. But it is true. I mean, there is a continuity of imagery, how you use, well, I mean, just like classical imagery of dragons,
Yeah.
representing sort of natural and supernatural forces, celestial and terrestrial, and there is a real now. I mean, he's of course his poetry is not except to the degree that Chinese is always more concise, more inspissated than English.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the oracular terseness of the Tao Te Ching. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's even then. It's going to present difficulties for. But the translator you have here is the great
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Chavez. So, and I think he renders Woolley quite beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, that's always one of the things that's fascinating because, of course, I do have. Well, I have not only a fascination with Chinese history and literature and language, but the long history of interactions between Christianity and China. First,
Mm-hmm.
the Church of the East, the Assyrian Church, the Luminous Way, you're
Yeah.
right, the famous stele, but also the period of the Catholic missions, the Chinese rights controversies, all of the ways in which uh, Christianity was trying to establish itself there, the Jesuit order especially, but
Yeah.
not exclusively. Alas, had it been exclusive, you never would have had the Chinese rights
Yeah.
controversy, and it wouldn't have been quite such an embarrassment. Um, and I just see Woolley as just a fascinating convergence of worlds because he is
Yeah.
genuinely Chinese. The sensibility is Chinese, the imagery is Chinese, but he's also very much a Christian thinker, very much a Christian
Mm-hmm.
artist. His and I think he was a great poet too. I mean, again, it's an idiom for which we can only have a remote appreciation because of
Mm-hmm.
both times. But I find him absolutely fascinating and absolutely missing for
Yeah.
the most part
Yeah.
from our consciousness of global Christianity.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that I really did try to do. There are poets from Ethiopia and here, from the Philippines, um, as well as Sorwana, who's kind of more still in the Spanish cultural orbit, but she
Yes.
did make some efforts to engage with the native peoples in
Yeah.
Mexico as well. So I did really try to include a lot of those poets from later eras. And of course, Christianity started in the East. So we have the Syriac poets and
Well, I
the
think you begin with Senephrim, right? Is that,
yeah, yeah,
if I recall?
and he's you know um, at least that I'm aware of is the kind of the first great Christian poet to arise out of the faith, and So he starts, I believe, in the 300s in Syria, and in case other people don't know, Syriac is just a particular version of Aramaic, which is the language of Christ. And a lot of people don't necessarily know that there was a long continuing tradition of Christianity in Aramaic. And we tend to think the New Testament is in Greek, and then so Christianity kind of moved on from that Semitic world, but it isn't actually the case. And
well, this is true. I mean, the Western consciousness of Christianity is, for obvious historical reasons, more provincial. Curiously enough, despite
yeah,
the vast expanse of, say, Catholicism, the average Western Christian, I've actually I had this hilarious conversation not long ago. The young woman asked me if I was more sympathetic to the Augustinian or the Methodist. Right? She was, when I mentioned to her that I was Orthodox, she was entirely at sea. Now, admittedly, I'm a Western person, so,
yeah,
but honestly, she had the vague sense of the existence of Russian Orthodoxy and Greek Orthodoxy. And as we began speaking, now she was fairly well educated. I'm not trying to hold her up to scorn here, but the truth is, uh, she had little concept of the Syrian tradition, Semitic Christianity, Armenian, Ethiopian. She was shocked that there was an Indian. I told her about the Malankara,
yeah,
all these things. So, I mean, there is a tendency, of course, because of course the historical dominance of Western Europe and Western European culture in the second half of the Christian era. More conscious of itself, but it is quite often surprising to me that how many even educated Christians don't have a sense of Christian culture as a global culture that's
yeah,
diverse, not particularly Western. And I'll tell you this, might as well admit it. One of the reasons I enjoyed this anthology when it arrived, when I was still utterly mystified as to why it had come to me and from whom, and is, to be honest, a kind of reflection on the political moment we're in. This obviously you're above the northern border, so you're a little bit, but not entirely, you're a little bit insulated against this. But this not only rise in Christian nationalism, but actually several decades now of West is best culture war rhetoric that assimilates not just Christianity, not just to the Western national identities, but to capitalism, to Western modernity, and makes this a point of identities, of Christian identitarianism. A book like this, I have to say, I found very wholesome in having exactly the opposite effect on any I would think cognizant reader. Is you get a sense that to confuse the faith, Christian faith, with a civilizational identity rather than a sort of pervasive presence throughout human civilization couldn't be a more preposterous misunderstanding of the history of Christianity.
Yeah, yeah.
In cutting yourself off at 1800, which again I understand, when dealing with, say, Latin America, in a sense, that doesn't give you access to the ways in which a Christian literary culture that has, say, mestizo elements, indigenous elements, has come into being in the 19th and 20th centuries. But I still think it was for the best
yeah. Well, certain as you're probably well aware, having published several books, is that even if you have a very indulgent publisher, there are there are limits to how large of a book that they're going to put out. And I am at work on the sequel, as it were, to this particular book, but
And is that going to begin at 1800?
that's going to begin at 1800 and hopefully come up to the present day. Um, but yeah, the anthology is 200 and some pages already, and you know I could have probably filled 600 pages if I really wanted to.
Let me ask you this: what are your general views regarding your feelings about philosophies of translation, and do they influence the translations you used in this volume, or were you constrained by availability?
Well, I think this was kind of a fairly low budget affair. I wasn't, I didn't have access to large amounts of funds from the publisher, so to a certain degree, I was constrained by what was already available. But uh, I I have a fairly broad um, philosophy of what makes a translation acceptable. So there, what you'll find in this book, you'll find some, free verse translations of originally formal poems. You'll find a lot of poems that are translations that do keep to the at least the original rhyme scheme, if not the, meter is a much more difficult thing. Uh, I I think a lot of it does come down to what works with an individual poem. And there are some poems that completely work if you go from, say, a sonnet in Italian coming over to a free verse translation in English. The matter is the subject is so strong that it kind of carries over, and as long as your writing is good on um, other aspects of technique, I think it doesn't necessarily require that you use the some sort of formal equivalent in the new language. However, I think that in other cases, the poem, if you don't try and bring over the formal elements, or at least find some sort of equivalent to the formal elements, that it just dies on the page.
Yeah.
And
Well, then you have to tread a very sort of narrow ridge because you can easily lapse into doggerel
yeah,
in order to preserve some sort of formal consistency. Well, we mentioned Wu Li earlier, that in a sense, there's a kind of liberty in translating, say, from Chinese to English, because there really are very few analogies of structure. There's certainly,
yeah,
though there is, most people don't know this because of the way Chinese verse is often rendered into English for any number of reasons. But in the in the classical canon, there's a great deal more rhyming verse
hmm
in Chinese, and verse that scans, even though it's not a language of stresses in the same way that
yeah,
English is and French isn't. Um, but in a sense, one of the reasons I think that the Chavez uh, translations of Wu Li read very fluently is because there was it would have been impossible for him to try to
yeah,
imitate formal structure anyway. It would have been meaningless.
yeah,
He would have produced, and this is an old complaint of mine, something that's barely English. Um,
hmm
but it is a much more delicate problem when you're going, say, between German and English or Spanish and English,
hmm
and there I have all sorts of mixed feelings because, well, I don't know about you. I've got over the I mean I've got, I don't know, maybe 500 or so poems I carry around in my mind that I've
hmm
memorized over the years, mostly in English, but in a variety of languages. Um, and they're you do become conscious of something. You do become conscious in the act of translation that no matter how ingenious your translation is, you're if you're a really great translator, you're still at the last confronted with two possibilities. One is just to produce a new poem in English
Hmm.
that creates an experience that's analogous, but not a poem that's analogous.
Yeah.
Uh, or you can let's be honest, what you produce is you just accept a certain mediocrity, a certain failure of effect.
Hmm.
Who did the John of the Cross? They weren't the Roy Campbell, right? John of the
No,
Cross.
they weren't Royal Campbell. They were Rena Espaillat.
Right, yeah. And it's an interesting effect that's produced, but it's not very much like John of
Hmm.
the Cross. I mean, John of the Cross is a special case, obviously, because
Yeah.
for those unaware of this, he's among readers of Spanish, quite often regarded as perhaps the greatest lyric
Hmm.
poet in Spanish tradition. And there's a very strange and captivating music, in the Dark Night of the Soul,
Hmm.
una,
Yeah.
una noche oscura con ansias, sin amores inflamado de cosa ventura, salí sin
Hmm.
ser notada estando ya mi casa sosegada. I mean, you just get uh, Segura. That's one of the poems I have.
Yeah. Yeah.
But is that there's such a strong and surging music, and it carries you through into this
Hmm.
like condition to the end because the imagery, the going out at night, and of course he was a genius when it came to onomatopoeic effects in
Yeah.
general. So like I can't remember. It's his rendering of the uh, uh, well, his version of the Song of Songs, so to speak.
Yeah.
When he gets to the point where he's describing the stuttering, so to speak, but of the speakers, and it's sort of que dan,
Yeah.
in the Spanish, not written as a stutter, but written as syntactically correct sentence. And I know one can't carry the one doesn't.
Yeah.
This is not a question. This is just
Yeah.
this is just an old man going over things that have consumed his
Yeah.
attention for years.
Well, my remark on that is that a lot of, well, this goes to especially shorter lined, um, sort of more purely lyrical types
Yeah,
of poetry are just almost impossible to get across.
yeah,
And, um, as you say, a lot of the time, the better translations are just a kind of a separate poem in a new language.
yeah.
And, a lot of examples that I can think of are certain poems by the French poet Verlaine. Is another, the it's just not going to come over to English no matter what you do, no matter how skilled you are.
Well, curious. I mean, I think French always creates a special difficulty. To be honest, I mean, I don't think there will ever be, barring just some prodigy of linguistic inventiveness,
Hmm.
somebody we can't, even imagine. There'll never be a translation of Racine
Hmm.
that will capture in English the strange sort of just the flow and
Yeah.
gleam of Racine's verse, the way it just uh, it is the most virtuoso use of the unstressed beauty
Yeah.
of French. And there has never been, and I don't think there ever will be, a great translation of Shakespeare into French. I
Hmm.
just again so even between Western languages that have certain syntactic and even have a certain vocabulary in common,
Hmm.
the barriers can be absolutely insurmountable.
Yeah.
Um, Better in German, but even then,
Hmm.
there's a special music there. You have, for instance, let's say I've written Angelus Silesius.
Hmm.
You have to every line in Angelus Silesius rings, but they are quite often just little couplets,
Yeah. Yeah.
very condensed, gem-like. Die Rosa ist eine Warum sie blöd, weil sie blöd, I mean, there's not
Hmm.
much you can do to unfold that. And there's not,
Yeah.
and there's also not much you can do to transform that into an equally striking English couplet.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of which, though, I would say, nonetheless, it's a lovely collection you have
Yeah.
here. But sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that detour. But
Well,
do,
um, there's just kind of at a certain point there's an exception or an acceptance of imperfection
yeah.
that goes along with translation in general, but particularly with the translation of poetry. And um, unless you know the other languages, you're just going to have to accept that you're only going to get a certain amount of what they have to offer, even through the very best translators. And so, perhaps that kind of lets people a little bit off, the early anthologists a little bit off the hook in that, they doing this type of book is kind of difficult to, the translations are not going to be the same as the original.
If you'd had your druthers, would you have had it, facing pages, the original and the translation? If you'd had the budget and the
Um, well, yeah, I think that's always the most desirable thing. Although that does also require that the person knows at least a little bit of the other language as well. Um, you know,
here you would have been at something, I have to say, something of a disadvantage, because you would have been expected not only to produce the original texts of these European tongues, but also gayouts,
yeah,
the Chinese. Is there
yeah,
Armenian in here? I can't remember now. I think
there is Armenian in
there is Armenian. Yes, indeed. Yeah. So yeah, no. So it would have been an impossible.
there. Yeah,
You would have needed a whole editorial staff and researchers.
and I also kind of view this anthology as more of kind of giving people a little bit of a sample that they can then pursue on their own a little bit. That just kind of makes people aware a little bit of what is out there, and it's not necessarily intended to be, some. Uh, it's not intended for people to stop at what's in the anthology.
What I really did love about the anthology, and the reason I'm hoping people pick it up and read it, is just that the generous vision it gives of the sheer scope
Hmm.
of Christian culture in general, but of the poetic experience
Hmm.
within Christian culture. And this is my pitch for it. I just see that a really beautiful attempt to bring together a sense of I don't know what other word to use for the cosmopolitan
Hmm.
diversity, the variety, the fullness of Christian experience. And as I said again, because of our current cultural and political situation, I see reading of this sort as a very healthy antidote
Hmm.
to the tendency to try to conscript our confession into some kind of cultural
Yeah.
identity, civilizational identity.
Yeah. So I had one question for you about, and I'll start up with an example. But the question is, what poets do you think I should have included in this? And I'll start off. I actually, after I published this, my wife uh, took me out on a trip to Sri Lanka. My wife is a doctor, and she's done some medical missionary type of work throughout her life, and we wanted to meet up with some people, some native people from Bangladesh that she had made friends with. Sri Lanka was the most convenient place to do so, and I learned about there's very quite well known in Sri Lanka a writer of hymns in Sinhalese, and both Sinhalese and Tamil, that I only discovered on my almost immediately after having published the book. So I don't know if there's any others that you thought I might have.
But I mean, there are figures who don't appear here that might have gone in had you been simply striving for comprehensiveness in your
Mhm.
survey, like Gregory Nazianz and um, uh, famously wrote the long
Yeah.
autobiographical poem that some of whose, I mean, it's pretty stilted, I guess, it's that sort of
Well, there are some wonderful bits in Gregory's poetry,
yeah.
uh, but I find that his poetry suffers from something that I also find in the poetry of C.S. Lewis, in that it's got a lot of argument in it,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure that um, argument is necessarily what poetry does
I
best.
say this, but whereas I'm willing to speak of C.S. Lewis's verse, I'm very rarely willing to speak of his poetry.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's well. All right. Well, let's try again. I'm not saying this is what I would put in, but it is interesting. Simeon, the New Theologian.
Um, at least in the translations that were available to me,
hmm,
I thought he was not as good a poet as the other Byzantine Greek poets in that I put in.
yeah.
So I put in Cosmas of Myuma and St. John of Damascus and Romanus the Melodist. Those were the ones that I picked from Greek. And those, at least in the scholarly books that I had access to, those were kind of the ones as well that were recommended as the best of
Yeah.
the Byzantine Greeks.
Yeah.
So when I'm doing this, I'm kind of in, not knowing Greek myself, I'm kind of in, murky territory. So I have to rely on others' judgment and also a little bit of what's available to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your instincts were sound, though. I will say this. Part of it is are issues of sensibility, issues of temperament. I agree with you that there are no really good translations into English of Simeon. But when reading Simeon's verse, I think one has to put it in a special category of kind of ecstatic, almost Whitman-esque. All right.
Hmm.
He tended to be judged adversely by those with a more formalist temperament, and most scholars of Byzantine verse
Hmm.
tend in that direction anyway. So I think there are great lyric passages in Simeon um, of a very expressive kind. Think of the young Dylan Thomas.
Yeah, yeah.
But to be honest, they're not matched by his prose. I mean, they don't match up to his prose, and those same ecstatic states quite often are better described in his mystical
Hmm.
treatises. So, I mean, I wouldn't call him a major poet, but I would say that there are moments of true poetic grace there. That if I
Hmm.
had, but that would, I think, have involved actually doing a new translation because
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not. Well, also, because part of this is going to be the definition of what constitutes Christian verse, not just
Yeah.
in terms of, like you mentioned it with Petrarch. He's not. We don't primarily think of him as a religious poet. I mean,
Yeah.
he's not like George Herbert. You don't have to go
Yeah.
searching for the Christian content in George Herbert. With
Yeah.
Petrarch, it's more elusive, and a great deal of the Christian content that Villon and others in there.
Yeah.
This is Marian hymnody, Marian poetry, praise to Mary. So it emanates from a very specific
Yeah.
um, Catholic sensibility of the Virgin rather than the
Yeah.
Dynamo, so to speak. You can imagine
Yeah.
the sort of poetry that got Henry Adams terrifically excited.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but I mean, in a different sense, where you draw confessional boundaries, because one that occurred to me would be, say, the Hymn of the Pearl,
Hmm.
that in certain texts of the Acts of Thomas,
Hmm.
Thomas in India,
Yeah.
son, but also enjoys an independent existence. Um, a great work of poetry, but of course it's associated. Some would uh, let's say be unwilling to accord it the status of Christian verse because
Hmm.
it's belonging to a heterodox tradition. Um,
Well, I'll mention that it did briefly cross my mind to include some of Valentinus.
yeah,
In,
yeah.
um,
But in all we have there, the gospel of truth isn't really
yeah,
poetry. So you'd have had to work. I mean, that's the only thing we really have that we.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't think it's impossible to draw that line between Christian and non-Christian, but it's working with you're kind of working with a whole bunch of things at once. You're judging on quality, you're judging on what the scholars say. You're inevitably you're kind of judging on what your own personal taste is as well. I tend not to be, the anthology has a very broad inclusiveness with regards to theological tradition,
Yeah.
and so I tried not to be too exclusivistic, but you make your judgment calls, and that's um, I generally sort of and I know this is kind of could be construed as vague or open to interpretation, but I really it was really about whether the poet had a belief in Jesus as someone that was divine, uh, and as well that they were writing about some sort of well, obviously they would also believe in God, but they believe in God. They believe that Jesus is a divine figure who is coming down to save humanity. I wasn't terribly picky about how that was cashed out. And then the other criterion was to do with the content. Did it have a sort of religious aspect to the subject matter? Whether is it about God or Mary or
By those criteria, of course, the hymn of the pearl would make it in, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah,
Jesus is divine in the Acts of Thomas. Now, the hymn of the pearl is odd because it seems to be the autobiography both of the Savior and the saved at the same
hmm,
time. It's a curious work of, and it's a work of genius in some ways, I think.
yeah.
Um, but it wasn't excluded because of its heterodoxy, or I mean, did you flirt with it, with the possibility of including it? Uh,
Not not really, no. And well, I'll just kind of be a little honest here that I hadn't really heard of it until after the book was published. So
oh,
that would just come down to my personal ignorance as
well,
well.
speaking as someone who's not ignorant about anything ever, who's no, no, yeah, no, okay, well that's fair enough. Um, um, I think also, I mean, another question that occurred to me because especially now that you tell me that you're going to do a sequel volume that begins with 1800 is it seems to me now that you may have to be wrestling uh, not with your conscience but with your critical intellect to determine uh, whether to include poets who in a sense are Christian sub contrario, if you know what I
Yeah,
mean. I mean, the most obvious example of all from the 19th century might be Baudelaire,
yeah,
who, to most of his contemporaries, who would have seemed only a monster of blasphemy, he even writes poems and from the vantage of a Satanist.
hmm,
And yet we know that he was very devout, if very eccentric and sometimes
hmm,
heterodox Christian in that special French way
yeah,
that somehow mixes deep Catholic piety with a hint of diabolism,
yeah,
Huysman. When you go to the Journaux Intime, these very fervent
Mhm.
expressions of the faith that's being, in a sense, reflected inversely in the mirror of a fallen age, what he
Yeah.
regarded as and I think that there's more of that, when you move into the 19th and 20th centuries, more and more Christian verse becomes uh, less homiletic, less hortatory, perhaps.
Mhm.
Again, like the metaphysicals, many of the great Christian poets of the 20th century are engaged in an actual theological uh, wrestling with the content of faith, but also with the negations of modernity.
Mhm.
And sometimes speaking from what seems like a dispirited or um, even defiant or,
Yeah.
or, or even unbelieving uh, position.
Well, my current plan is to include Baudelaire in there. There are some um, his faith. I think had more was starting to have more impact on him as he was dying
Dying,
in the last.
dying, yes, yeah.
And there are some of the prose poems. I actually did an article on Baudelaire and Christianity, and I translated a couple of the later prose poems for
Spain,
that.
yeah.
And so
Spain,
I'll
yeah.
probably be including those as well. And there's one, and my mind is blanking on the exact title. There's one poem in verse that is more directly expressive of Christian sentiments in his later life as well. But there's not a lot.
Yeah. No, I mean, of course, I took him. Of course, he's such an extreme example, and you're right. I mean, it's part of the defiance. Although, even in the days of Le Fleur du Mal, um, when you look at his well, not only his private journals, but just what we know about him is that the piety was never wholly absent. I mean, there's
Mhm.
always
Yeah,
um, when he speaks of the satanic or the Luciferian, for him it really is the
hmm
worship. It is the modern faith. He really believes.
yeah,
And and quite straightforwardly, capitalism for him, is operates by a satanic law, which is that you must take more than you give. To him,
hmm
that's the whole of the law of our modern economics or modern society, and that's the ultimate negation of the generosity of God. So I mean,
hmm
it's there all along.
yeah,
I think, but and it shows up in strange places, like in his writings on Poe. You catch this sort of
yeah,
fugitive glimpse of Christ in the
yeah,
background.
yeah.
Um,
So yeah, he's an absolutely fascinating figure, and as you say, throughout his life, that he was, you know, continuously kind of on the edge, you might say.
yeah.
Well, if you don't mind for just a couple of minutes, I'll remark on a figure that's perhaps a little bit even more problematic than Baudelaire um, for my new anthology, and I think that might kind of provide a little bit of
Who,
context as well.
who do you?
And this would be, say, a white South African poet like Tosius. I don't know if you know
Yeah.
that
Okay.
name.
Yes.
And he is he's extremely well regarded by everybody who knows the Afrikaans language, even people who are, completely secular. But problem, and not only that, he's the most acclaimed translator of the Bible into Afrikaans as well. But his he's also deeply implicated in um, the theological justification for apartheid. And so, my sort of broad inclusive instincts are to include a figure like that, even when you have these very, I would even say, extremely problematic theological baggage attached to them.
Well, worse than problematic, obviously. Yeah.
Uh,
Um,
and so those are kind of some of the issues that I'm having to deal with as well. And he's not the only South African poet who has some of that baggage as well. And there's others as well in other parts of the world. And so you know, um, my instincts are to include everybody, and then kind of address those type of issues in the preface, which I've done in this particular book a little bit as well.
yeah, and of course, there you won't have. I mean, let's be honest. Historical distance helps.
Yeah, yeah,
In the ancient, medieval, and even early modern men and women, it's easier to think of as products of their time.
hmm
When you move into the context of more proximate history into modernity, then then the judgments seem more uh,
yeah, yeah,
not only correct with the judgments we pass, but in a sense morally requisite.
hmm
So yeah, well, I wish you well with that.
yeah.
I'm
It
not,
does bring, it brings up all, and there's other, issues that the contemporary church is dealing with that I have to deal with as well. So I'm kind of wrestling with that sort of thing as well. Issues of sexuality, and again, I tend to be much more on the, it's a poetry anthology is maybe not the best place, I don't think, to fight theological wars, but you do have to at least think about them.
you do, but in a sense, I mean, obviously, putting aside the issue of apartheid because that's an
Yeah,
especially uh, severe problem. But in a sense, to the degree that you can put aside strictly dogmatic or theological disagreements
hmm
in an anthology of this sort, that's part of the convenience I mean, that's not just
yeah,
convenience,
yeah,
it's perhaps part of the benefit
yeah,
that choosing to be concerned with art with the
yeah,
rather than with the granular distinction and terms of art that
yeah,
but for which we've been killing each other for centuries or hating each
yeah,
other for decades is
yeah.
is actually a very valuable contribution in its own right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, perhaps I shouldn't have um, taken on the anthology, but we're kind of working on it as it is.
No, I think is, and the second half is also going to be all in translation.
It's all going to be in translation. Yes.
Yeah.
There are wonderful, poets. Some again, sometimes with problematic aspects like T.S. Eliot or Les Murray or others. But um, yeah, the focus will be on poets in translation.
Well, I look forward to it. Anyway, thanks for talking to me. Sorry that
Well,
I've been coughing at you.
no, not at all. And I'm really glad that you enjoyed the book, and I'll do a little shout out as well to our mutual friend Henry Winefield. He was the one that suggested I send the book to you. So um,
Now, there's a translator I greatly admire. I mean, he's a poet in his own right, whom I greatly admire. But I, I'm frequently astonished. I don't know, just the ingenuity, because if it were just ingenuity, it would be a matter of, well, they did that very cleverly, like Lawrence Binion doing Dante.
mhm,
You said, my God, how did he pull off Terza Rima all the way through?
mhm,
Um, but actually, no, I mean, the real aesthetic sensibility that Henry has. So,
yeah,
if he translates Ronsard, he produces in English a true lyric poet
Yeah.
named
Yeah.
Ronsard. And that's a rare gift. So, yes, let's both give him a shout out.
Okay. Well, it's been lovely talking to you and making your acquaintance.
Well, take care. Thanks.